Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony Bonacolta, and today for this month's ISOP membership spotlight, I'm here with my current postdoc advisor, Patrick Keeling. And he also happens to be a former president of ISOP. So thanks for coming on here, Patrick.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So I like to start these off with just like a general, how long have you been a member of ISOP, and how has your involvement with the society influenced your research and career?
Oh, I don't actually remember when I joined. It was a long time ago. And ISOP and ISAP were always kind of separate, kind of apart. And I think my involvement probably came in through ISAP, to be honest.
Yeah.
I remember going to an ISAP meeting right at the very start of my PhD, but then I've been to meetings over the years pretty much regularly. And so I'd say it's kind of always been there.
Yeah, like same, like it's pretty much always been a mix of like ISEP, ISOP, ICOP, and like I didn't know the difference for the first
Mhm.
like 2 years, but like now it's kind of cool to see like little
Yeah, and it's kind of always there. It's always part of what we're doing.
yeah. Is there anything you're looking forward to at ICOP Korea this summer?
Well, I'm looking forward to just going to a meeting, to be honest, because I haven't been to very many since COVID. I was in Austria, of course, and then that's about it. So just I'm just excited to go to a meeting. Also, this meeting's been put off before, and I was really keen to go and visit Korea because it's a place I've never been. There's a lot of protistologists there, and I know some of them, and I've never visited. So I'm just looking forward to that. Kind of looking forward to just meeting up with old friends and things like that too. So I'm sure. That's always a high point of meetings for me.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and in terms of ISOP in general, do you think there's like any steps we as an organization can do to better convey the importance of protostology to other scientists, like say in like our department or
Hmm.
just the general public even?
Yeah, that's actually a really important point because we are, as a field, always peripheral, as the way I think about it. Just a second, someone's mowing the lawn. We're always kind of the outsiders in our own departments, and we're the outsiders at many meetings, unless it's our own meetings. And so I've always sort of thought that that leads us to learn to tell good stories. That's how I think about it. Like protostologists always have to give a lot of context, a lot of introduction. They have to explain why what they're doing is important because they're not used to talking to people that just get it.
Yeah,
So I would go to that storytelling. I think we need to be good storytellers. There's a lot of different ways you can tell the same, you can explain why data is important in 10 different ways. And I think we need to we have to be better than everybody else at that to make them understand why it matters because there's no like intrinsic, like they don't just get it. So you have to always explain it.
yeah. Is that like do you kind of come across that framework kind of when you're trying to pitch the project as a manuscript, or is that during the grant process, like when you typically
Always
kind of
when you give
story
a
tell
talk,
there?
write a paper. So like I talk to people in my lab about this a lot. Like when you write a paper, like let's say you've discovered something in some protist. There's always, like I said, 10 different ways you can tell that story. And sometimes it's about the protist, but sometimes it's actually the real story is about what the protist tells us about something else. And so it might be about an evolutionary process or biochemical pathway or something. And so that first paragraph of your paper is always really important because do you launch off with say dinoflagellates are interesting because of blah blah blah, or do you
Mhm.
launch off and say horizontal gene transfer is interesting and dinoflagellates have taught us something about it. It's all about the how you unfold the information and lead your reader along or your listener at a talk or the panel writing or reading your grants. I think that's super important.
Okay. Do you see any challenges for our field in the future, like with any new type of technology or approaches, or just like issues in science that particularly affect protostology? Or
I don't think you have to look to the future. I think we're in the middle of maybe the biggest challenge to science I hope that we ever see in our lifetimes. And I don't know, again, we're peripheral. So I guess I mean, unfortunately, sometimes you're competing against other scientists for breathing space and for funding or for whatever. But I think, I suppose right now what we should all be doing is we should all be getting together and getting on the same page and fighting for science in general, because there's never been such an assault on fact and truth in my lifetime that we're seeing right now, and it's frankly quite scary. And I guess what I worry about for our field is that as typically peripheral people, we might feel the pain a little bit more acutely than some other fields, but I hope not. But it might just boil down to that. What I said already is that we just have to be just that much better because,
Yeah.
you know, oftentimes you're talking to people who aren't necessarily in your camp, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, true. And it probably ties back to like the storytelling aspect too, because a lot of the random like stuff you see in like what's used to be Twitter and everything is like, oh, like the government is funding this project that looks at like different gender and pigs and stuff. And like they just have like no context for like what the science actually is being studied. And they just see like a random thing that pops their mind, like, oh, that sounds dumb. Like,
So it's easy to make. I mean, you can take a sport and just make it sound super dumb, like so
yeah,
easily. Can do that with anything. So I don't know. We all have to be better communicators. We've always all had to be better communicators with the public, and that's really hard to
yeah,
do. I don't think we're good at it. I know very few people that are. Um, yeah, it is a challenging time, and I mean, but I'll tell you one thing for younger people that are listening. If you think about what fascists want to crush, they're all good things, right? And they go after academics pretty high on the list. And that should tell you right there that you're on the right track. What you're doing is important, matters, it's positive. I mean, that's one of the lessons over the last couple of years is that we are on the right side and we should keep doing what we're doing.
yeah. Yeah, and kind of along the same lines, you were recently elected to the National Academy of Sciences. From my understanding, it's like a US based organization. So like I know they had like a whole thing with
Yeah.
the White House probably, and I don't know what ended up happening there, but um
Um, there's international members. There are not very many of them, and I'm
okay.
frankly a little bit upsmacked that I was elected because I didn't think that honestly, I didn't think that I had the sort of caliber that would ever be an international member. It was a huge surprise. But there's a practical. I mean, not being in America too, I have just for anyone that's curious, I'm Canadian. Um, there's some things that are relevant to me and some things that aren't. It's a great organization. I've learned a lot about it already in the first year. But the thing that's really stood out for me that really is huge, and I'll say this at my own peril, is that I'm now able to handle manuscripts for the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is a fantastic journal. And I would say which our field has lacked expert representation of in the editorial pool. And so many of you might have experienced this when you send a paper to a journal where there are no people that really understand your field very, very well, that you can get kind of maybe bad reviews, and then they don't know what's a bad review. And I empathize with that. It's hard to tell. But yeah, for an entire field to have a really good journal like that, really hard to get into because you're just playing, roulette with the reviewers is tricky. And so
Yeah.
I decided that what I want to do is actually put some effort into that, like support really good protistology papers through that system as the handling editor. And that's not an open invitation to send me junk. This is like, I would like to see some of the best protistology appear in PNAS, and I think that's actually time well spent. So that's sort of what at least for the time being, at least that's what I've decided. I want to make my little pet project out of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and like it's crazy that it's taken like this long for like kind of big protestologists to have some representation there. Because it's you and
Oh,
it's Julius Lukesh this year that was also elected. So
yeah, Julius was also
yeah.
elected, so send papers to him too. We've had experts in the past, for sure. It's just there's been sort of like there's a couple people and they're overworked and it's hard on them. So it's really what I'm saying, I guess, is that there's lots of people that are interested in microbial evolution or whatnot, but there's not so many people that are really interested in the diversity of microbial eukaryotes, let's say.
Okay. Um, as someone who's described a ton of protists and has worked with protists across the eukaryotic tree of life, do you have a specific personal favorite discovery, you would say, or like a favorite discovery of a colleague, even?
Oh,
A little bit of a shift.
well, the discovery of the colleagues is a good one because I find with me, it's always the kind of, you know what I really like? And there's a bit of a burn to it too. It's when you read something and you're kind of like, I wish we'd done that." You know what I mean? But when somebody does it really well, like as long as you're not like if you're a PhD student and you just got scooped, it's just bad. But I
Mhm.
mean, for me, like especially if it's something we haven't really lifted a finger doing, it's just would be cool.
Yeah.
When you see someone else do it really well, you're kind of like, wow, that you're like, oh, I wish we did that, but God, they did a good job. Oftentimes you go like, they did a better job than we would have done. So I like those. There's several of them. I mean, you did one. The Ichthyocolas was the perfect example. Would have loved to
Thanks.
have done that. Um, so yeah, there's those. My own personal ones, I don't know. There's I love the novelty, like the times when you're like, whoa, they do that, that kind of thing. Or I mean, and actually, I've been lucky. There's been quite a few of those kind of like really sort of things in my career. Right back to my PhD, it's not the best one, but the first one, for example, is
Mhm.
discovering a different genetic code in a protist. You just stumble on it. You can't go looking for that. But I like those like the little curveballs where the data don't make sense, and then all of a sudden this light bulb comes on. You're like, holy cow, this thing uses a different genetic code. That all makes sense. That's the kind of stuff I like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's awesome too. And it's like that's not stuff you can really write into a grant either. That's just like it's mostly like accidental. Like
Yeah, that would be suicide. Yes. I wrote in a grant once though, with a particularly far-sighted organization. It was the Moore Foundation. I did actually write a section once in a grant that was successful, where I made the argument that there's a difference between luck and creating opportunities. And so if you kind of look in the right places with the right kind of open mind, you can find lots of unexpected stuff. You just if you engineer the circumstances to be perfect, and apparently they were okay with that. So, but I wouldn't advise writing that in your average federal government agency thing. I'm just going to go look and we're going to find cool stuff. That won't
Mhm.
work.
Are there any past mentors who have positively influenced your scientific career? If so, what specifically did they really do to sit you on this path?
All of them did. I was really
Yeah.
lucky. Everybody I worked with was great. So like when I started back in Dalhousie, I didn't know anything about anything. My PhD advisor was Ford Doolittle. He was fantastic. I learned so much from him. And actually next door was Mike Gray, who sort of grew like as even after I left Dalhousie as a mentor, he had a huge impact on my life. And both my postdoc advisors, Jeff McFadden and Jeff Palmer, just fantastic. I learned a lot about science, but also just like how to get along with people. But people are going to be like, you learned that. Just how to just I don't know live a life in science. They were all really fantastic at these kind of things, and so yeah, I couldn't even begin to name all the things I learned from them. I just got super lucky.
Yeah. Awesome. You teach a protistology course. Well, you've taught one at UBC for quite a while now. Do you have any like major takeaways from teaching this course? Because it's not really common at a university to even have a protistology course. Is there anything specific that
Great
gets students
takeaway.
interested or yeah.
Yeah. So there should be more, obviously. It's ridiculous how like the undergrads don't choose to go into protostology because they're turned on by some class, usually because they never had a class. They don't know anything
Mhm,
about them. So I teach a class that's topped out at 100 students, and it's part of the core curriculum in the biology program, like an option amongst 4 courses that they could take. And I think, and that's been great for me because it's been this source of fantastic students. I've had great graduate students that
mhm,
actually came into my lab from the protostology course. And actually, other people have had graduate students that got into protostology through my class. So I'm quite proud of that. And I think uh, there should be more of them, but I think it also boils down to storytelling again. Like if you sat down and you said, "I'm going to teach you guys all these facts about protists," they'd hate it because I hated classes like that too, and I'd hate it myself. But if you can kind of, I mean, my philosophy, I'll tell you a story. We have to write these things and submit them called our learning outcomes or something.
Hmm.
And I wrote, I want the people that take my class to become well-informed citizens that might have a dim recollection in the future that protests are interesting and important. And I submitted that. And they said, no, you can't submit that. And so then I cut and paste someone else's learning objectives for my class and submitted them, and they said that was better. But that is actually my objective. I would like people to, I don't think that I'm training protestologists. I just want people, like if someone reads a story in the news about a red tide years later, I want them to remember that and kind of go like, oh yeah, I took that class. Those are bad or that's important or something like that.
Yeah.
One of my PhDs actually was coming back from a meeting and got into an uncomfortable grilling session with a border guard where he was asking them more and more questions about what was this meeting about and what was your talk about and all this kind of stuff. And they were getting really worried. And it turned out it was a student that had taken my class and he was actually just curious. And he was like, so, oh, you work on endosymbiosis, like that. And this person was getting all freaked out. I don't remember the details, but anyway, it was someone that took my class, and I was like, "That's great. He remembers that stuff, and he had a positive view of it." So I think that's fantastic.
That's awesome. And like, do you have like a general framework that you put in place for the class? Like, what is the main like storyline you follow with it?
Right. We had a big debate right at the start. Me and just I was talking to people in the lab and other people involved in the class. Do you break it up taxonomically or not? Like, do you just march through all the groups? And I
Mhm.
never really wanted to do that. We did a little bit of that, and it's actually been squeezed down to almost zero in the class now. So what we do instead is we break it up by we have a section on it's all processes. So at the start we have a big section on the origin of eukaryotes and endosymbiosis, and then we have sections on feeding, sections on skeletons, sections on locomotion, infection, behavior, stuff like that. And so all the protist groups kind of come into this, like you cherry pick something really cool about feeding and
Mhm.
tell them about it in the context of feeding. But we don't go through the tree like a march. Like this is what a ciliate's like. This is what a trypanosome's like. We don't do
Yeah.
that. And I understand that might not be the most popular idea, but it's just the way it worked out well for us. And I think it actually works fairly well for the students too. I think they get lost in the details if there's because there's just so I mean, the other diversity classes are doing like they might have one that's like angiosperms. And I mean, I'm like, angiosperms are diverse, sure, but all the protists is crazy. So this I think works pretty well. I like the way we do it.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's much easier to get like the compare and contrast between different groups that way, as opposed to just like going through memorizing facts about each one individually, and then just like kind of getting them
I
twisted
don't
as you
get
go
lost
through.
in details. I
Yeah.
don't care if a student in my lab remembers what a cryptomonad is. I really don't. That would be asking too much. But if they kind of have an understanding of that, there's lots of different ways for protists to move around, or lots of different ways to feed, or that there's cells that get in other cells and infect them, or what's a plastid, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm happier that they take away with.
Sweet. So last question, do you have any advice for other protostologists, particularly early career researchers, like from undergrad all the way to even like postdocs, I guess?
Be back to the storytelling, I think. And I don't mean bullshitting. I mean like putting your data in a context that people see why it's interesting. I mean, we've probably all been to talks or read papers where we kind of went like, wow, you guys are kind of exaggerating how important that is. And that actually turns everybody off. But I think if you can like tap into your legitimate excitement about what you're doing in a way that people feel that it's like they know that you're excited about this and that you are really jazzed about what you're doing, that's great. And then if you can sort of take this subject matter and put it in a form where people intuitively kind of grasp like why it matters.
Mhm.
What it, like people have won Nobel Prizes several times for working on protistology, for example, but they're not but it's they didn't win the Nobel Prize because of the protest. They won the Nobel Prize because of what they learned about something bigger, which is all biology.
Yeah.
And protists, I love protists, but protists have so much to teach us about everything else. So, they break every rule. And the reason why is because they're not actually rules. And so if you tap into that kind of thing and can really put things in a context, in a story, like if you can sort of like a narrative where
Hmm.
people sit down and read it and kind of go or listen to your talk or whatever, and they kind of go like follow through and they always understand what you're saying, don't confuse them, but they understand it's interesting and complicated and you did a lot of work and all those things too, then I think that helps a lot. Because you can knock people's socks off with this stuff. This is better than the Serengeti and the lions and zebras, and this is way more interesting. If you can tap into that and you know tap into your own little David Attenborough, and get them excited about all the things that these things are doing and how crazy they are.
Yeah.
We got the raw material. I honestly think as a field we're not very good at capitalizing on it, but it's all there. If we figure out how to tell those stories, I think that'd be the best advice I could give. And learn to write. Learn to write fast
Like
and well.
learn to write as in to learn to write those stories or like learn to
Yeah, I don't know
format
what I used to
properly.
tell everybody, but with AI, I don't know what's going on anymore. I would say don't don't depend on AI, I suppose. Learn to write. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, alrighty. Well, thank you for being here and sharing all this awesome knowledge and perspective. Like, I think this is great. So, thanks
I hope
again.
so. I don't know what you want, but I hope it's entertaining.
No, it was good.
Okay.
Alrighty. See ya.
Thank you. See you in 30 seconds.
Yup.